Chapter 3. In mingled horror and dumbfoundment, Howard was taken through an opposite entrance of the Rockelim's cavern and along a sort of hall which appeared to run parallel with the one in which the incline had ended. Agvur walked at his side, and the Uamni guards were grouped before and behind him. He surmised that the glittering hollow tubes they carried were weapons of some novel type. As they went on, the mysterious throbbing noise drew steadily nearer. Howard saw that the far end of the corridor was illumined with the fiery red light. The air was touched with queer metallic odors, and the temperature, which had heretofore been one of unobtrusive warmth, seemed to rise slightly. At one side, through an open door in the passage wall, as they neared the source of the red light, Howard saw a large room whose further end was filled with lofty banks of shining cylinder-shaped mechanisms. In front of these mechanisms, a solitary Mercutian stood watching an immense pivot-mounted ball which appeared to be filled nearly to the top with liquid blackness, leaving a crescent of bright crystal. Near the ball there was a sort of inclined switchboard from which arose many rods and levers made of some transparent material. "The lighting apparatus of all our caverns is controlled from that room," said Agvur with a sort of casual boastfulness. "When the ball has turned entirely black, the sunlight will be turned off for the 3-hour period, which gives us all the sleep and rest we require." A moment more, and the party reached the end of the passage. Howard stood blinking and breathless with wonder when he saw the source of the dazzling red light. He was on the threshold of a cavern so enormous that its roof was lost in luminosity and gave the effect of a natural sky. Titanic machines of multiform types, some squat and ungainly, and others like prodigious bulbs or huge inverted funnels, crowded the cavern floor, and in the center, towering above the rest, was a double terrace-like platform of sable stone, 30 feet in height, with many pipes of dark metal that ramified from its 2 tiers to the floor like the legs of some colossal spider. From the middle of the summit, the ruddy light arose in a great pillar. Gleaming strangely against the fiery glow, the forms of Uamnis moved like midges. Just within the entrance of the Cyclopean room, there stood a sort of rack, from which hung a dozen suits of the Maufa metal. Their construction was very simple, and they closed and opened at the breast with odd dovetailings. The head was a loose, roomy hood, and the metal had somehow been rendered transparent in a crescent-like strip across the eyes. The suits were donned by Agvur and the guards, and Howard noticed that they were extremely light and flexible. He himself, at the same time, was ordered to disrobe. "The Maufa mixture, during the process of fusing, gives off some dangerous radiations," said Agvur. "These will hardly matter in your case, and the suits of finished metal will protect my companions and me against them, even as against the deadly solar rays." Howard had now removed all his clothes, which he left lying near the rack. Still pretending his resignation, but thinking desperately all the while and observing closely the details of his situation, he was led along the crowded floor amid the sinister throbbing and muttering of the strange engines. Steep, winding stairs gave access to the terraced mass of dark stone. The Earthman saw as he went upward that the lower tier was fitted with broad, shallow molds, in which doubtless the metal would run off from the furnace to cool in sheets. Howard felt an almost overpowering heat when he stood on the upper platform, and the red glare blinded him. The furnace itself, he now saw, was a circular crater, 15 feet across, in the black stone. It was filled nearly to the rim with the molten metal, which eddied with the slow maelstrom-like movement, agitated by some unknown means, and glowing unbearably. The black stone must have been a non-conductor of heat, for it was cool beneath Howard's bare soles. On the broad space about the furnace, a dozen Uamnis, all sheathed in the glittering Maufa, were standing. One of them was turning a small, complicated-looking wheel mounted obliquely on a miniature pillar as if he were regulating the temperature of the furnace. The metal glowed more brightly and eddied with new swiftness in its black crater. Apart from this wheel and several rods that protruded from long, notched grooves in the stone, there was no visible machinery on the platform. The stone itself was seemingly all one block, except for a slab 10 feet long and 2 feet wide, which ran to the crater's verge. Howard was directed to stand on this slab at the end opposite to the furnace.
"In another minute," said Agvur, "the slab will begin to move. We'll tilt and precipitate you into the molten maufa. If you wish, we can administer to you a powerful narcotic so that your death will be wholly free of fear or pain."
Overcome by an unreal horror, Howard nodded his head in mechanical assent, snatching hopelessly at the momentary reprieve. Perhaps, even yet, there might be a chance, though he could have laughed at himself for the impossible notion. Peering again toward the awful furnace, he was startled to see an inexplicable thing. Foot by foot, from the solid stone of the crater's further lip, there rose the figure of a Mercutian, till it stood with haughty features, very tall and pale, and wholly naked upon the platform. Then, as Howard gasped with incredulous awe, the figure seemed to step in a stately manner from the verge, and hang suspended in air above the glowing cauldron.
"It is the shoal, Onavodo," said Agvur in reverent tones. "Though he is now many miles away in the nether caverns, he has projected his televisual image to attend the ceremony."
One of the Mercutian guards had come forward, bearing in his hands a heavy, shallow bowl of some bronze-like substance filled with the hueless liquid. This he proffered to the Earthman.
"The narcotic acts immediately,"
said Agvur, as if in reassurance. Giving a quick, unobtrusive glance about him, Howard accepted the bowl and raised it to his lips. The narcotic was odorless as well as colorless, and had the consistency of a thick, sluggish oil.
"Be quick," admonished Agvur. "The slab responds to a timing mechanism, and already it starts to move."
Howard saw that the slab was gliding slowly, bearing him as on a great protruding tongue toward the furnace. It began to tilt a little beneath his feet. Tensing all his muscles, he leapt from the slab and hurled the heavy bowl in the face of Agvur, who stood close by. The Mercutian staggered, and before he could regain his balance, Howard sprang upon him, and lifting him bodily, flung him across the rising, sliding slab, which bore Agvur along in its accelerated movement. Stunned by the fall, and unable to recover himself, he rolled from the tilting stone into the white-hot maelstrom, and disappeared with a splash. The liquid seethed and eddied with a swifter motion than before. For a moment, the assembled Omanis stood like metal statues, and the televisual image of the shoal, standing inscrutable and watchful above the furnace, had not stirred. Leaping at the foremost guards, Howard flung them aside as they started to lift their tubular weapons. He gained the platform's railless verge, but saw that several Omanis had run to intercept him before he could reach the stairs. It was a 12-foot drop to the second platform, and he feared to leap with bare feet. The strange curving pipes which ran from the upper platform to the main cavern floor offered his only possible means of escape. These pipes were of a darkish metal, perfectly smooth and jointless, and were about 10 inches thick. Straddling the nearest one, where it entered the black stone just below the verge, Howard began to slide as quickly as he could toward the floor. His captors had followed him to the platform edge, and, facing them as he slid, the Earthman saw 2 of the Immortals aim their weapons at him. From the hollow tubes there issued glowing balls of yellowish fire, which came flying toward Howard. One of them fell short, striking the side of the great pipe and causing it to melt away like so much solder. He saw the dripping of the molten metal as he ducked to avoid the second ball. Others of the Omanis were leveling their weapons, and a rain of the terrible fire globes fell about Howard as he slid along the pipe's lower portion, where it curved sharply toward the floor. one of the balls brushed his right arm and left an agonizing burn. He reached the floor and saw that a dozen Immortals were descending the platform stairs in great bounds. The main cavern, fortunately, was deserted. The Earthman leapt for the shelter of a huge rhomboidal machine and heard the hiss and drip of liquid metal as the fireballs struck behind him. Threading his way among the looming mechanisms and interposing their bulks as much as possible between himself and his pursuers, Howard made for the entrance through which he had been conducted to the furnace by Agvur. There were other exits from the immense cavern, but these would have led deeper into the unknown labyrinth. He had no clearly formulated plan, and his ultimate escape was more than problematical, but his instincts bade him to go on as long as he could before being recaptured. He had heard the mysterious pounding of the untended mechanisms all about him, but there was no sound from his pursuers, who came on in grim silence with incredible leaps, gaining visibly upon him. Then, startlingly, as he rounded one of the machines, he found himself confronted by the televisual phantom of the shoal, standing in an attitude of menace and waving him back with imperious gestures. He felt the awful, burning gaze of eyes that were hypnotic with age-old wisdom and immemorial power, and he seemed to hurl himself against an unseen barrier as he sprang at the formidable image. He felt a slight electric shock that jarred his entire body, but apparently the phantom was capable of little more than visual manifestation. It seemed to melt away, and then it was hovering above and a little before him, pointing out his line of flight to the pursuing Omanis. Passing a large squat cylinder, he came to the rack on which the suits of Maufa had hung. 2 of them still remained. Disregarding his own garments, which lay in a heap nearby, he snatched one of the metal suits from its place and rolled the thin, marvelously flexible stuff into a bundle as he continued his flight. Perhaps somewhere he would have a chance to put it on, and thus disguised, might hope to prolong his freedom, or even to find his way from this tremendous underworld. There was a broad open space between the rack and the cavern exit. Howard's pursuers emerged from the medley of towering mechanisms before he could reach the doorway, and he was forced to dodge another fusillade of the fireballs, which splattered in white-hot fury all around him. Before him, the menacing phantom of the shoal still hovered. Now he had gained the corridor beyond the exit. He meant to retrace the route by which he had come with Agvur, if possible, but as he neared the door through which he had seen the watcher of the darkening globe and the light-controlling mechanisms, he perceived that a number of Mercutians, armed with fire tubes, were coming to intercept his flight in the corridor. Doubtless they had been summoned through some sort of teledition by the furnace tenders. Looking back, he saw that his former guards were closing upon him. In a few moments he would be surrounded and trapped. With no conscious idea other than the impulse to flee, he darted through the open door of the cavern of light machines. The solitary watcher still stood beside the massive ball with his back toward the Earthman. The crystal crescent on the dark globe had narrowed to a thin horn like the bow of a dying moon. A mad, audacious inspiration came to Howard as he recalled what Agvur had told him about the control of the lighting system. Quickly and silently, he stole toward the watcher of the ball. Again the vengeful image of the shoal stood before him as if to drive him back, and as he neared the unsuspecting watcher, it rose in air and poised above the ball, warning the Omani with a loud, harsh cry. The watcher turned, snatching up a heavy metal rod that lay on the floor, and leapt to meet Howard, raising his weapon for a ferocious blow. Before the rod could descend, the Earthman's fist had caught the Mercutian full in the face, driving him back upon the slanting dial of regulative levers beside the pivot-mounted ball. There was a shivering crash as he fell among the curving crystalline rods, and at the same instant utter overwhelming darkness rushed upon the room and blotted out the banks of gleaming mechanism, the fallen Omani, and the phantom of shoal.